Good to go. All right, guys. My name's Joseph. I've been into lock sport for about 8 years now. At a 2600 meeting, a friend of mine, he mentioned to me that at these hacker conferences, there are a lot of lock pickers, and they bring all kinds of crazy locks. And so I went to my first conference about 2 years ago, and absorbed it. And I had an awesome time. And so I decided that slowly but surely started working on my own presentation of something that I hadn't seen, but is really interesting to me, and I hope it will be to you guys too. In particular, it's the history of locks. There's all kinds of manipulation talks, but I'm interested in the whole spectrum of locks, the aesthetic value of locks, why they were made, why they were replaced. I guess my credentials for doing this, I don't really have any except for the enthusiasm that I love locks and just about everything about locks. I'm from Kansas City. We started this past year the Cowtown Computer Congress, so if you guys have a chance, go check us out. We do lock picks and barbecues every Sunday, so if anybody's ever comes through Kansas City, drop by. We're in a cave 80 feet below the ground, so it's a lot of fun. Without any further ado, this is locks and security. So to give you guys an overview, we're going to go through the past, present, and the future. In the past, you've got all kinds of archaic types of technology. In the present, there's some that should be considered archaic, but they're still used today for whatever reason, cost reasons. People are used to them, they're comfortable with them. And then after that, we'll move into the future, which is not the so distant future, but the things that are they're in use today in certain certain financial sectors and military sectors, but they're just not available to the public yet because the cost is so high for some of the machines, for face recognition, iris scan, those types of things. So that's where we'll be going with this talk. To start out, I like to define a couple of terms here. A lock is a device to secure a door, gate, lid, drawer, or the like in a closed position with a bolting system propelled and withdrawn by a key or a dial. So that could be if you have an electronic safe. It could be a keypad. If it happens to be voice activated, your voice is your key. So key is not always a physical thing, especially in the case of locks. Whenever the technology starts to move along a lot quicker, keys start to get phased out. People rely on electronics a lot more than they do in the physical world now, which I'm sure everybody's aware of. A couple more definitions here. Any device for stopping temporary motion of a mechanism. I think that this is an important definition because when the general consumer thinks of a lock, they think that nobody can get through because it's a lock. That's changed a lot with the internet, with people seeing bump keys and stuff. I'm still in the school of thought that even with these bump keys that have made the 5 o'clock news and stuff, it's really not something to worry about as far as I'm concerned, because like the textbook definition says, it is a temporary thing. If someone wants to break in, there is not a lot of skill involved in bumping a lock, but there's still a certain degree of skill, whereas a foot through the door or breaking a window requires far less skill. And I don't know if you've ever tried to make a bump key on your own, but it's not as easy as as the 5 o'clock news would let you believe. Granted, you can buy them online, but that's a completely different thing. If somebody wants to buy it online, but and then security, something that secures or makes safe, protect, defense. Pretty straightforward definition. Precautions taken to guard against crime, attack, sabotage, or espionage. The first two, crime and attack, those generally deal with your home. In my particular home, I don't even lock my doors because I know my neighbors. Some people think that that's foolish, but I've been robbed enough times and had my car broken into enough times that my stuff remains unlocked, so that I don't have to replace a door or a window, because if somebody wants to break in, they're going to, especially with residential. As far as this sabotage and espionage are concerned, that's when when the actual security of your building, it is really important. It's a lot more important than home security. That's when you get into like the abloys, buy locks, things like that. And that's because there is sensitive information, and it's not as easy as kicking down a door and being really brute about your way of entry. So those two I typically reserve for industry and military, and then the first two are kind of commercial. So in the beginning, we have the Vikings in Greece. They also use this quite a bit. They would have sacks that they would carry around on their ships, and it wasn't so much a safety precaution as much as it was somebody messed with my stuff. And what it is over here is a reef knot, which is one of the most popular knots that the general populace would use to tie their bags whenever they were carrying them and then leave them wherever if they were going to the pub or whatever. And you'll notice that these two rounded sides here, they go off in opposite directions on the top half of the knot. And then with the thief knot, it was tied differently, which not a lot of people tied this, so it really was a pretty good form of security. And they go in completely opposite directions. So somebody would get into the bag and retie it, typically with the reef knot. So pretty primitive form of technology. Ropes are really where it all started. A really interesting way that in Greece that people would, that they would make sure that people wouldn't go in is they would tie these extremely intricate knots. So when you would close the door, these knots would, they typically be, about this size. And what they would say is that, if you did try to tamper with this knot or if you tried to undo this knot, then, bad things would come to your family. You would be cursed. All these kind of things. And, people through time, not quite as ignorant. One thing that I think might be interesting to implement would be in your house if they came out with like a radioactive lock, so that you had to have special gloves in the same way. So you try to mess with somebody's lock and you're screwed. You got cancer. This is a quote from the Odyssey. I'll read it real quick here for you guys. She went upstairs and got the room key, which was made of bronze and had a silver handle of ivory. This was typical in those times. The keys it was more important to have your lock look nice and your key look nice than it was for physical security, because most people weren't using locks. They didn't have the money. They weren't being distributed as regularly. Typically, like castles, people who were of high stature in society, and then it goes on. She went into her maidens into the storeroom at the end of the house where the husband's treasures of gold, bronze, and iron were kept. She loosened the straps from the handle of the door, put in the key, and drove it straight home to shoot back the bolts that held the doors. So this is what I refer to as the glory hole door. It's a door with a large hole in it, and so there would be these large keys. They varied in height, and that was basically the way that you would have different keys. So each key's length depended on which door it went to. And so they would typically have a room where the keys would be, and they would hand out these keys to people. And what you would do is, if you were on the outside of the door, if you imagine like a Katie bar on your on the door in your house, the Katie bar had a little, basically like a little dowel coming out of it. And you would put this iron bar in, and then you would turn it. You would do probably like a 90-degree turn. And what that would do is that's basically your actuator bolt. It would raise that up so that you could get in. So, thinking inside the box. This is a great form of security. In India, they would have these huge islands where they would put a chest or a strong box in the middle, or they would have a large pond area, and they would sink them. And what they would do is they would feed these alligators on a regular basis that was very small portions, so that the alligators were always on the brink of being starved. And so anybody who tried to get in, had to deal with alligators around there, which is a pretty great form of security, really. They were also, guarded by security people. But this is actually also one of the first instances of, I don't want to say safes, but definitely lock boxes. I mean, the boxes themselves were not extremely secure. It was more about the obstacles in the way to get to the box. I mean, if you could get to the box, getting inside wouldn't have been an issue for very many people, because it really was pretty much literally just a box. But it was more about the obstacles, the layered security, I guess you could call it. Yeah, exactly. And one thing about this type of security that I think would be awesome, and I think you could get a ton of viewership, is if you had like a reality TV show maybe, and you had boxes in the middle, and then you get a couple of celebrities and a couple of people, and they have to go out and get to the box. This is, by the way, the history of locks is pretty short, because you'll find out in this slide here. 2000 BC, this is where we started using the first wooden locks. This is a diagram of, it's actually a replica of one of the first wooden locks. This isn't an original image of a lock, but we'll get into the finer points of what your current door looks like, but it looks strikingly similar to this. What you have is you have 3 housing units right here for pins, and then what you have here is this is a shear line. You have what looks like a spaghetti, basically like a spaghetti spoon strainer, and what you would do is you've got another glory hole door over here, and you would reach inside with the lock. You would just pull it up, and is a really simple mechanism, and then you would push it forward, or rather pull it back, and that would release the bar. And up until this time, or even during this time, people were still not so much concerned with people who weren't supposed to be in there. There was a lot of ignorance to it. So if you'll notice in this picture right here, you have another key, and you also have a gentleman with a key here. So certain people did have keys to these doors, but if you didn't have a key to the door, and let's say it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and there's no gatekeeper to let you into the town, if you were in the know, if you were part of that town, you would reach right up there, and that's essentially the spare key. So there's really no security there, as far as if anybody else knew about it. But at the time, people were uneducated to it. It wasn't something that everybody knew. So let's see here. And then we move to warded locks. This is the first time in history that we start using completely metal locks. One thing that's really interesting to me about warded locks is, like I said earlier, people wanted to. It was more about aesthetics and making things look really nice and looking like you had some class and prestige than it was about actually securing your belongings. So you have all these great keys, and there's just a wealth of information. There's all kinds of collectors that sell these antique keys and locks. This one, obviously, it's an anchor, so it was probably on some kind of chest, probably like a padlock. The keys that you see up in the right-hand corner there, those are warded pick keys, basically, and that's where we get the term the skeleton key. Granted, a skeleton key like that would not work on a lock like that. It would work on this, but the exact same principle applies. They did have sets of keys, and essentially you would have, they were U-shaped, and so this next slide gives you a little bit better idea of exactly how the ward lock works here. Okay, so you've got the key, and then you have all of these wards here. There's another example of it right here, and they're essentially, you have them even on your current keys, but we'll go into that later. But so basically, you've got these wards that you have to pass through them and hit an actuator bolt to release the bolt. And so they would come up with these, great elaborate keys. But the problem with it is that it's like this particular key, for a skeleton key to compromise a lock like that, it would be shaped like a U. And what it would do is, this is where the actuator bolt would be. And once you hit that bolt open, or once you hit the actuator, the bolt slides open. And so all you would have to do is you could cut out that cross completely, and it would still hit the bolt. It really is a very aesthetic thing. It looks really complex from the outside, which is that was part of the security. Then is, the better it looks, the more moving parts it has, the more that people thought it couldn't be compromised. Which is, that's still in practice to a certain extent today. Then we move to the lever lock. This is a huge invention. It's beautiful. If you ever have a chance to see one of these or use one of these, you probably have used them in your bank. That's where they're really common. Robert Barron, this was in 1778. So, like I said, there's a huge jump between using warded locks during the medieval times and the Dark Ages for 14th, 15th, 16th century, and then they come up with the lever lock. And this one actually would have used 2 keys to get in. So this one is probably from a safety deposit box. Then you've got your bolt right here that would slide back as soon as you open it. But to give you a kind of an animation here, by the way, this isn't my animation if anybody's curious. But so you'll see the keyhole right here, and then the key comes up through, and then you've got the actuator bolt right here, and it has to clear through all of those in order to release this bolt. with the illustration, it becomes pretty clear how this lock could be picked. You can put any piece of metal that was shaped like that, similar to the skeleton keys that I described earlier, and manipulate them manually one by one. But a little bit later, Chubb, who is one of the most well-known locksmiths to date, he creates what's called a Chubb detector lock. And can anybody see how this might work? I mean, just by looking at this here, do you have an idea of how the detector might work? Any guesses? That's absolutely right. So what would happen is you would put your key right here. This is where the hole would go. And then if you have the correct key, you would turn it, and all of these would go up to the perfect distance. And then this bolt right here would be able to slide through perfectly. However, if you're trying to manipulate it manually, and let's say you go too high, this is the detector right here. And what happens is this piece falls down underneath here, and it's rendered completely useless until you have what's called a reset key. Even if you try to pick it and then you come across the correct key, or you pick it in the correct order, it's still impossible until you get the reset key so that you can reset the bolt so that it goes back up there so that the bar can slide through. And these are still widely in use today. If you talk to any lock enthusiasts, they usually have pretty good things to say about lever locks. They're still very effective. There are different variations from now, but this is bare bones what they started with. Masterpiece locks are some of my favorite locks. This kind of goes back. Most Masterpiece locks are ward locks. People still make them today. But basically, it was all about aesthetics. Royalty, what they would do is they would commission locksmiths to make them locks, and it would literally be like if you were in an executive office, and it would just be a lock sitting there. Really, no functional use for most of these locks. They just looked beautiful, and they had as many pieces as possible in them, and they did as many different. Uh-huh. Yeah. With rope, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's one thing that I think that in the current security industry, maybe not for industrial use, but and this is probably just because I'm a lock enthusiast in general, but when you go to Home Depot and you buy probably a quick set, it would be nice if if you had some foliage like this, and people just don't have that on their house. One company that I'll go into later, and they still are very simplistic, but the locks are beautiful, is Brahmin. But I think that there's a lot to be said for having a really beautiful lock, even if it's a quick set. If you cover up the quick set sign and add some foliage or whatever, enhance the quality of your house perhaps. These are a couple more examples. This one came out on I forget the name of the blog. I think it's Geekology or something. But I love this because nobody else gets to see it except for the person who lives there. But it's awesome to think of somebody knocking on your door and you having to go through all there. This is actually a trophy. You have a number of I believe it's 62 different locks. There's lever locks, there's warded locks, and then at the top you have a Brahmin lock. And then down here you have this is also a lever lock. What's really interesting about this, you can find a video online of it, but I didn't really think that it was necessary to show the video. But there's if you tried to manipulate it, similar to with the Chubb protector mechanism, it will shoot a harpoon or a spike into your hand, which is just pretty awesome. People would probably think twice if there was more technology like that nowadays. Yeah, absolutely, and it's kind of cool that they actually existed. Granted, nobody would probably use this, but a little bit later, there's another when we talk about safes and lock boxes, a lot of that there were lots of booby traps in those. Let's see here. Joseph Brahman. This is my, personally, he's my favorite locksmith. He was an inventor. He created the hydraulic pump system, and the reason was initially to put beer into the tavern upstairs from the kegs down below. So we credit him for that. This lock in the middle is called the Brahma Challenge Lock, and it says, the artist who can make an instrument that will pick or open this lock shall receive 200 guineas the moment it is produced. The guy who did this was Hobbs. He's an American locksmith, and he did it. It took him, depending on who you ask, if you ask the Brahma family, it took him like 62 hours. If you talk to just about anybody else, it was much shorter. And it was over the course of 6 days. It was at the World Fair. There's not really much information on how he did it, but whenever you look at the construction of the lock, it's not a perfect lock. It's a mechanical lock, so it's not really a question of of if he bypassed it. He essentially just picked it. And the way that this particular lock works is it's very similar to ace locks or tubular locks that you see on the sides of vending machines. But what he has here is you have one single spring, and then you have well, depending on the discs, they can vary on discs. That would be different levels of security for this particular lock. This one has 6, and in this next slide here, this is what each disc would look like. So you would have each of the 6 discs has chunks cut out of it in different levels. Then you have this hook piece, and what that does is that's what keeps it on track with the spring. So whenever the key goes down, similar to a tubular lock, which you'll get a little bit better idea of how that works, all of these notches would line up perfectly, and they'd be able to turn the actuator bolt and then open your lock. So it's pretty ingenious. Nobody picked it until I think it took him. It was 37 years after Brahma had died. Then we move on to the tubular lock here. Everybody's seen them everywhere. It's extremely common type of lock. Most people refer to them as ace locks. Ace is actually just a company that makes the lock. The actual name for them is tubular locks. And so right here you get an idea of this is a Brahman key, and this is a tubular key. So it's pretty much they took a page right out of the playbook from the Brahma lock. The way that this particular lock looks in the inside is you've got springs. So with the Brahma lock, you just have the one large spring. In this one, each individual pin has a spring, which I guess it would probably be a matter of debate on whether or not that would be easier to manipulate because each one has its separate pins, or if there's just one large pin. But basically, right here, what you have is in between the green and the yellow is a shear line. And similar to the Brahma lock, you push these pins in to a certain degree, and each cut is different, so each pin is a different length, and then the pins line up, and you're able to turn the lock and move the bolt. So, the pin tumbler. So this would be the present. Like I said, there's not a lot of change from the Egyptian lock that we saw at the beginning to this lock. Linus Yale, if you've ever seen Yale locks, that's not a coincidence. They invented the lock. In 1848, Linus Yale Sr., and then his son improves on it. And these are everywhere. I mean, this is what you have in your house more than likely. To give you an idea of maybe if you are ever having a conversation with a lock enthusiast, this may be helpful. Just kind of a breakdown of the key here real quick. You've got the bow, the blade, the bit, and the ward. An interesting thing that most people don't even really think about is the keyway. Everybody, for the most part, there has a different keyway depending on the key in the lock that you have. So this is an added piece of security, which you may or may not already know, but it's just very interesting that whenever you get into the more high security locks, they put a lot of emphasis on the wards on their keys and the keyways because it makes it harder to put a tool in, or it makes it harder to get a hold of, or whatever the case may be. So next time you're looking at your key ring, it's a really interesting thing to look at because everybody wards their keys differently, and every keyway is different, and that's for security. It's not an aesthetic thing. So, okay, so the inside of the pin tumbler here, just a little lesson. I give a dossier on this one because everybody does use it. I won't go into any manipulation or anything like that, but basically you've got your hole, you've got your plug, which is where your key pins are, and then you've got the keyway. So this is what it looks like whenever you put a key in there perfectly. You have a shear line here, and whenever the shear line is completely clear and there's nothing in its way, it's able to open. If even one pin or a portion of the pin is in the keyway, you can't open the lock. This is what it looks like whenever it's closed. You've got your key pins down here and then your driver pins, springs. So it's pretty self-explanatory. This one I think helps whenever people aren't familiar with locks. I know we have a couple of people that have picked locks and understand this concept, but the shear line is the most important term, if nothing else, to take away from this, and that's when the shear line is completely clear and the pins are lined up. That's what allows you to open a lock. If there's anything in the way, it's not opening. So here's just a couple of 3D diagrams. So you've got the driver pins. This would be in the locked position, of course, and then you've got the driver pins that are blocking all of them. And then you put the key in, correct height on all of them, you're able to open it. So there's that. And that's the incorrect key. So you see that you've got a pin here in the way and a pin back there. So it's obviously not going to open. In just kind of an extra piece of security, I guess you would say, BuyLock. I'm not sure if that's the correct name of the lock. I haven't found anybody that really knows. BuyLock is a company that makes this particular type of lock. And so if we go back here to this diagram, a BuyLock key is similar to this and almost the exact same in that it's shaped like a U. So you have basically two different keys that you're putting in the lock, and they can have security pins. So the idea is that in the keyway, if you actually if you have a chance to go up and look, they have one upstairs. But the keyway is extremely hard to get into, and you can pin it differently. So I mean it's just an added piece of security. It's basically like your home lock, but times 2. So and then we have Medico. Everybody gives Medico a lot of flack because if you have been following in the news or on the internet, they've been compromised in a number of different ways, which I'm not going to go into, but I am going to talk a little bit about them. Medico uses angled key cuts. What this means is that you've got your keys. If you look at your home key, it goes straight up and down. Medico uses biaxial pins, and what they are is they'll either go 20 degrees left, 20 degrees right, or 0. And depending on that, that's how the key is cut. So it'll be cut at 20 degrees. And what that does is that will spin the pins inside of the key, which also allows you to release a sidebar, which I have a picture of in the next clip. One thing that's interesting about Medico is that in a lot of high security locks, you'll have security pins down here. They have security pins up here, and then they're specialized custom biaxial pins. So extra added piece of security. The other thing that's interesting about Medicos is they put little bars here to prevent drilling. You can still drill it. They also put half crescent moons. You can still drill through those, but it's really a rating of how long it takes you. It's not a if you can drill through it, because you can. I mean, but it's more of a timing thing. So this is what I was talking about with the pins. Okay. So these right here, what these notches are, they make it so that the pin can't over-rotate, and because if it over-rotated, then it'd be going into the lock. And so what happens with the biaxial pins is that whenever the key goes in, the pins turn, and once all of these pins line up, there's another example of it. But when the pins line up, the sidebar falls into place, and what the sidebar is just this bar. It's another added extra piece of security in the lock. And then, of course, if you were going to try to manipulate this manually, you would also have 4 mushroom pins, 2 regular pins. Just as a little side note, people a lot of times will ask, why don't you just put all security pins in? The lock you wouldn't even be able to open it with the lock if you had all security pins. You have to have at least one pin that isn't security, so that otherwise these pins will bind. So this is a front view of the keyway, cutaway view. All right, so this is what it looks like when a pin binds. whenever you put maybe the wrong key in, or if you are picking and you're not doing it very well. Well, not if you're not doing it very well, but pins will always bind whenever you're trying to manipulate locks. So that's what that looks like. This is what a clear cutaway looks like. Notice the shear line's completely clear, so you're able to do that. Just to go into a little bit of the security inside of these locks, the straight up and down pins that you saw in the last clip, that would typically be like what's in a quick set or a lot of your home locks. When you start paying a little bit more money, they cut a little bit of the pin out, and it's far more secure to physical manual manipulation. So this is a mushroom pin. It gets its name. All of the pins get their name based on how they look. This next pin is a spool pin, which I personally have more trouble with than mushroom pins. I don't know why that is, but that just happens to be the case for me, and it's because it looks like a spool. What's interesting about these pins is they can get caught in, I suppose, more places than the mushroom pin can. That may be part of why it's harder. So that's that one. This is, to go back to the Medico, this is what the sidebar looks like. So it's a little bit hard to explain in that last slide, so that's why I wait for here. But so basically, even if you raised all the pins to the right height, and you still had the sidebar in there, the sidebar, it can't get past that. I mean, this is steel and part of the hole. So the pins turn. It has a little notch down the side of the pin. So if it was like this pin, there would be a slice of it, and then it'll fit in there perfectly. The sidebar will release and allow you to open the lock. This is an interesting. These are, by the way, these are Deviant's. If you guys are familiar with him, he has a lot of resources. If anybody wants the web address, I can give it to you. But this is something that I heard him talk about. I've never personally been able to see one of these, but these are basically pin-in-pin. So if you were to try to manipulate something like this manually, you're not quite sure which part of the pin you're manipulating. It could be the inner pin or the outer pin. So really interesting lock. Then we have combination locks, which probably should be a little bit earlier in the talk. More specifically, probably right after Linus Yale. But he also created these combination locks. And when it says Rome, there were the type of combination lock that we're talking about is similar to the master lock, not these types of locks. These are extremely easy to compromise with thin pieces of metal, so that's why they aren't used very often. If you've ever messed around with a briefcase, I mean, you can usually open it even without any formal training. Also, interesting thing about these types of word locks, the first form of cryptography was used with these word locks, where two people would have boxes with locks. One box would be bigger than the other. You would put whatever valuables you had in one box and lock it with your code. Then you would give it to a friend, and they would lock it. And so it took both sides, to open up the lock. It couldn't be opened up individually by one or the other, unless, of course, you compromise the lock, which is definitely a possibility. This is a shackle lock. I just add this because it's in pop culture quite a bit nowadays. With the Coke can shim, which is, I mean, you've been able to do it forever, but it hasn't really surfaced until just recently. So these shackle locks work a lot in the same way that a safe works. It uses dials, and then it has a bar that falls into place so that you're able to open it. And then we move on to Abloy here. Abloy is kind of the creme de la creme of locks. As an interesting note, people talk a lot of, like I said, they talk a lot of trash on Medico. Abloy owns Medico and probably about 100 other lock companies. So it's kind of interesting if you go and look and see who Ossis Abloy owns. I mean, if you're interested in that kind of thing, I suppose. But okay, so the way that Abloy works is it works on a disk principle. They have a D-shaped keyway, which makes it extremely hard to manipulate or get a hold of. So you'll see right here, this is the D shape that I'm referring to. They do angular cuts, 360 million for a 6-disk tumbler. You obviously can add more disks than just 6. And so they do 0, 18, 36, 52, 72, and 90. And so whenever you look at this key, those are the cuts on the particular key. And so, let's see here, hang on. Okay. Oh. Well, it kind of depends. No, I guess the short answer would be no. Like in a pin tumbler, you have 6 different heights of pins, and it may be pinned like 3, 3, 2, 1, or something to that effect. So it's pretty much random. Of course, I don't think you'd ever find a lock that was pinned at 0 all the way down. Yeah. Okay, so here's the bar that falls into place that allows you. So you've got the discs in a row here. So you see these little notches. You've got these little notches that on the. Sorry. Okay, those are right here. So these notches are what. Okay. So these notches are where the sidebar is going to fall into place once you have the correct combination of keys. If you are interested in this, these are some of the most secure locks. As far as picking is concerned, I'd always be pretty skeptical of somebody who says that they can pick one. I've never met anybody personally who's picked one. I've seen videos on the internet of people who say that they can decode it. One thing to note about Abloy and Medico is that they have key control systems. So even if you do decode the lock and you know what the the orientation of the cuts or the pins is, you still have to have somebody who has a key making machine and access to the blanks. They're not particularly easy to come by. Some people do have them, but it's just one of those things that is definitely not the mass majority of people that are going to have any kind of access or even know somebody who has access to it. So this is a cool lock. It has 14 discs as opposed to the 6 discs. So that's 78 million different combinations. And what they say on their website is that if you have 260 million people and you give each person 300 keys, you're only going to have one perfect match, which is it's pretty awesome. I mean, pretty good selling point. When I was talking about the wards in your keys and the key shapes and how Abloy has a D key shape, they have 200 different possibilities of keyways that they have. These are just a couple of examples, but that's part of the aesthetics is that they're so individualized and so unique that and it's also a security measure as well, so that it makes it harder to get a hold of the lock. Safes here and lock boxes. Going back a little bit to the lock that would shoot a harpoon into your hand. Some of the first people to do this were actually churches in the Middle Ages, and the lock boxes were typically made of wood with leather straps and iron bolts. And the lock boxes would be the same way that they would be booby trapped. So you would put money into the offering box, but if somebody tried to mess with it, they had it rigged so that it would shoot a spike or something unpleasant into your hand, which is to me it's pretty hysterical that churches did that. No, not at all. Different types of safe. You've got fire-resistant safes. There are environmental safes, security safes. With safes, you usually typically you see a dial. One thing that I really like about safes is that in the movies, that's actually pretty close to how you crack a safe, minus having a huge book with all of the combinations that you've listened for and all the clicks that you've listened for. It's pretty much. Do what? Was there? Oh, they use thermite? Yeah, and it can work though. I mean, if you're talented enough, and depending on the rating of the safe and the security involved in the inside, it can be done. But a safe like this is, I think, would probably technically be qualified as like an environmental safe, and that's people have safes for different reasons. Like I said, fire safes, environmental safes. But this safe probably needs to be climate controlled. And anytime you go into a safe that is an entire room, typically there are either documents or something in there that needs to stay at a certain temperature. And so that's why that exists. Fire safes, one interesting thing about fire safes is that they're rated for how many ever hours of burn. The higher that they can be inside of a fire, the more expensive that they are. What's kind of funny about them, though, is that after while the building's on fire, and the safe is getting extremely hot, the firefighters are also pumping water into the building, and fire safes are not rated for water damage. So a lot of times the documents will be ruined by water and completely safe from the fire. Yeah. Actually, another interesting story about the fire safes, and they're not security safes, so that should always be kept in mind. A buddy of mine, we went to behind a pizza shop and found an old safe that had 2 layers of security. One was a key that you had to open, which I picked, and then him being a little bit more, I guess, electronically enabled than I am, he was messing around with it, and the faceplate pops right off, so you can see the entire circuit board. Well, he pulled out the battery pack. He said, "Well, hey, I think that if if we use this battery pack, there's a possibility that the voltage would be the same that the solenoid needs to open it." And sure enough, it was 6 volts, which is exactly what's in there. And so, a little bit further investigation, I found out that, interestingly enough, a lot of hotels work the exact same way, where the power packs supply the exact amount of current that you need for the solenoid to enable the actuator bolt to open it. So this is just kind of the inside cutaway of a safe. They work a lot in the same way that disc locks work. The one big difference is that it's a dial. So you have these notches here, and what happens is whenever you're turning them, whenever you see the safe crackers with the stethoscope, what they're actually listening for is for these pins to hit each other. And whenever they hit each other, it grabs that next wheel and turns it around until eventually all of the grooves line up so that the bolt can fall into place and open the lock. So proximity cards. I guess this is, I suppose, where we would head into the future, even though proximity cards still pretty much fall into the present. With the proximity cards, you have an integrated circuit and an antenna. You can have a passive or active. Passive is what most businesses use to get inside. The wall mount is actually just waiting for a certain frequency to open it. And with an active one, you would have a battery, and it can actually transmit and interact and look for things. So, biometrics, you have physiological and behavioral. I'm sure that most people are, can put the pieces together with face recognition. It's obviously going to recognize your face. Fingerprinting, hand, iris, DNA, keystroke, signature, and voice. One thing that I just recently found at my job, I had to have someone's ID. I can't remember 100%. Somebody's from Virginia. Maybe you can tell me about the new IDs. I think that's where it was from, though. They have a see-through picture of the face, and then they have a normal picture of your face. And so whenever I got it from, I was looking at it and looking through the. It's a security feature. It's clear because it's obviously harder to find a piece of plastic or PVC, which is what they're made of, that's clear as opposed to one that's completely opaque. But he said that in his picture, they specifically told him and told everybody that they weren't allowed to smile. And they also proceeded to tell him that it was for face recognition, which is kind of interesting. I have a lot to read up on that because this is something that's brand new to me to hear about, that they're asking you to not smile, in some states at least, for your picture. But one thing that I think is kind of funny about this is that if somebody was interested in bypassing that security, you could just walk around with a huge shit-eating grin on your face all day. Right? Fingerprinting, it's one of the oldest forms of really, really good identification. Works on, if you look at your thumb, you have an arch, a loop, or a whorl. Everybody falls into one of those categories. With the arch, there's also a variation of that called a tent arch, which is just, it looks more like a tent than it does like an arch. It's really a minor thing. And so whenever you're fingerprinting, you're looking for ridge endings, which are right here. I can't pronounce it, but that's this one right here, and that's where it cuts off. And then you've got, those are short ridges or dots, and these are ridge endings. So wherever they stop, which actually, if you've never taken a thumbprint of your own thumb and looked at it, it's actually pretty interesting to, find all these different things that only you have in these certain spots of your thumb. The actual technology for thumb scanning used to look for these things. Now, what a lot of the higher-end equipment is looking for is actually a 3D model of the ridges and the heights of them, and not so much the actual patterns, which is kind of where that industry is going. 3D face scan, 40,000 data points, takes approximately 3 seconds to roll, which is really quick. I was pretty impressed whenever I first started reading about that. And it only takes about 1 second to verify. Obviously, pretty intrusive for the user, having a 3D model of everyone's face. And then iris scan, which not to be confused with retina scan. Retina scan is a little bit different, and it doesn't seem to work quite as well as the iris scan, so you'll see more companies using iris recognition. I don't know a whole lot about this technology. What I do know is that basically what it's doing is it's measuring, in all of these, it's measuring the distance around the iris. And each one is unique. It's, from what I've read, it's not any better than thumbprint scanning, but they like to use it because it's what they consider like a perfect piece of biometric identifier. I read about that, and they said that it really wasn't an issue. I have heard that though, so that'd be something for me to look into a little bit more. I haven't. That's a good question though. And so a couple of places that this is used in the private sector, they've started using it in a bank in Cairo, and to hear the interviews with the bank manager is really disheartening. He tries to make an analogy that he says, when the internet first came out, people didn't use it, and whenever cars first came out, people didn't use them, and now everybody uses them. And then he makes this huge leap and says, and everybody is going to want to, have their eyes, put into a computer for anyone for that private company to use, which is it's just kind of bogus. But as a little bit of a side note, with the thumb printing, a lot of the reason that I started the hackerspace because I am a photographer and an artist, and lockpicking is just something I kind of gradually got into as a hobby. And then whenever I started developing this hackerspace, started learning a lot more technical aspects. And one thing that's really interesting is about this the hackerspace movement and this type of biometrics is that the Chaos Computer Club, if you're familiar with them, what they do is they release a magazine, and they were going to start implementing thumbprint scans for passports and things. Well, what they did, and there's all kinds of articles about it, but what they did was they found the Minister of Interior or something. I'm not sure what it is, but they took his thumbprint, put it in their magazine, and it was a piece of plastic, and they showed how you can attach it to your thumb. So that piece of technology was, or at least implementing it in that way, was stopped in its tracks, which is some pretty awesome activism. That's just my little soapbox on that. Just want to thank Tool. I got a lot of my resources from them, and then Deviant. Any of those illustrations that you saw were his, so I'd encourage you guys to go check them out. They're awesome if you're interested in seeing any kind of high security locks or learning how to manipulate them. So, thanks, guys.